All right, Janet. So we'll start.
Sure.
All right. So good morning, guys. So today we are going to discuss about enterprise security with AWS. The topic is specifically related to security, and what are we'll also cover what are the security best practices, especially when you have workload on AWS. I hope everyone is fine and everyone is safe. I will introduce myself first. My name is Rahil, and I'm working as a pre-sales consultant with Redington Gulf, and I basically handle AWS. So we'll start now. So we'll talk about security, how security aspect was handled before and now how it is handled now. So initially when we talk about security, it is basically through certain checklist. We ensure that security best practices are followed. We have a long list and we ensure that we follow some security guidelines. And an administrator used to maintain that checklist, and a lot of tests will be done just to make sure the checklist is valid. Another form would be through Excel sheet, where an administrator maintains an Excel sheet for all the security related actions and ensure that these policies or these rules are implemented. These are these are old way of doing things, right? The things have changed significantly now. So now it's through code. So we handle security programmatically, where we define rules, we define compliance standard, uh, in form of a JSON template maybe, or in form of certain form of code, and it's now fully automated. So if somebody wants to see what compliance we are following, people can easily refer to the document or to the JSON and see what standard has been incorporated. And we use certain tools, certain services which are intelligent enough to run these rules and scheduled on a scheduled basis to ensure that security best practices and security rules are followed. So things have changed uh, completely when we talk about how security was handled before and how security is handled now. So before, it was a very manual process where we have exhaustive list of checklist and we run through those checklists and make sure everything set up as per the best practices. But now it's automated. So administrator can refer to the template and see what standards have been followed. There's a major change, right? So what does it mean when we have a change in security standard, when we have a change in security methods, how it's incorporated? So there are certain challenges, right? And what are those challenges? We'll discuss in this slide. So one challenge is related to large data set. Our data set is increasing day by day. We have more and more data now, and it needs to be examined at a greater level, right? At a greater depth, just to understand if there is any potential security vulnerability. So those large data sets poses a huge challenge for security folks. We also have challenge related to signal to noise, which means we do not get alert for potential security event. So if something happens in our environment and we want to get notified as soon as possible, and not only notified, we want to address that issue automatically without any manual intervention, right? So signal to noise is another security challenge because we have lots of event. And last, we have skill shortage. So we have security folks, but uh, a platform, it's a completely different thing. So it has to be handled in a different way, not in traditional on-prem approach where you can just set up one tool and you're done. It's not like that. So in cloud, there is a specific skill set which you need, and there are tools, there are services available on cloud, but it has to be set up properly. So there is a skill shortage when it comes to when we talk about security challenges. Now we will discuss about AWS security design principles, how AWS uh, consider security best practices, and what are the recommended design principle from AWS in terms of security, right? So number one, it starts with, of course, identity and access management. So every in every enterprise should have a very strong identity foundation, which means people should have access just to perform their jobs. This should not be a user who has permissions to, let's say, administrative permission. They should follow the principle of least privilege, right? You should have permission just to perform your job, nothing else. So this is very important, and this is one of the foundations of identity. Then enable traceability. This means you should be able to trace each and every aspect and each and every packet of which goes into your network. Whatever happening in your network, you should be able to trace what data is transferred inside your network. You should be able to trace, right? And you should be able to capture it with timestamp. So traceability is another important aspect when we talk about security. Third is very important. Security has to be applied at all layers, not only at application layer, not only at network layer, not only at transport layer, but security applies at all layers. So this is very important and something which people forgot. They say, okay, I have firewall, I've set up firewall rules, I'm fine. No, you have to consider application layer as well. You may get some application attacks, right? For example, DDoS can happen. For example, cross-scripting attack can happen. So you need to ensure security is addressed at each and every layer. This is very important, and this is something which AWS focuses very heavily. So security has to be incorporated at all layers. Then security best practices has to be automated. So security is not an option. So it's a requirement, and it has to be incorporated automatically, right? All the best practices has to be incorporated automatically, and we'll see in the upcoming slide how AWS helps us in automating all the security best practices. Keep people away from data. What does it mean? When people handles the data, there are chances that something would be missed out, some misconfiguration can happen, right? So AWS emphasize that keep people away from data. So data and everything should be handled by automated services. Protect data in transit at rest. So of course, encryption is mandatory at all layer, at all level. So when you have data stored as an object, so it should be encrypted. When data is transferred from source to destination, then also it should be encrypted by SSL certificate. So protecting your data at each and every level is very important. And last point is we should not ignore any security event, and we should be prepared for any type of security event. So preparation can help us mitigating most of the security related attacks or most of the security related alerts. So you should not ignore that, okay, my website is small, my customer base is small, I won't get any hit from outside. No, please do not ignore. This is very important, and everyone should be prepared for security events. Then only it can be addressed in a best possible way, right? These are some of the AWS security design principle which we discussed in this slide. Now, when we talk about security, AWS follows a shared responsibility model, which means security is a shared responsibility. So not everything will be handled by customer, not everything will be handled by AWS. It's a shared responsibility, especially for security. For example, AWS is responsible for managing their global infrastructure. They ensure uh, availability of regions, availability zones, edge location, compute, storage, virtualization layer. Everything will be taken care by AWS. And of course, the software side of it. So example, if you have a virtualization software, AWS will take care of it. You don't have to take care of the virtualization, right? But anything which you build on top of AWS infrastructure is your responsibility, right? So for example, client-side data encryption, data integrity, authentication, this is on us. So AWS will give us services that, okay, use these services to encrypt your data, but it's our responsibility to use those services and encrypt the data. Server-side encryption, again, this is our responsibility. network traffic, protection, integrity, identity. This is all on us because we will have tools, we will have services. For example, we can control inbound and outbound traffic, but it is on us to configure those rules, right? So this is again a customer responsibility, and customer has to configure the rules. Similarly, operating system, when if you are using infrastructure as a service approach, then operating system patching is also on us. Network firewall configuration is also on us, right? So we have to ensure that patches are rolled on to the operating system. Endpoint security is also handled by the customer. So that's a very common misconception. People think that, okay, with AWS EC2 instances, I will get endpoint security, I will get endpoint software. No. So it's just like a normal VM which you have in your data center. You have to secure it, especially when you go with infrastructure as a service approach. Platform as service, those operating system layer and your encryption layer is covered by AWS. But when we talk about infrastructure as a service, so we have to take care of the operating system configuration. Similarly, identity and access management, the platform, your application which runs on EC2 instance, everything is customer responsibility, because AWS will have no visibility what application you are running on your EC2 instance. So it's on us to secure that application. And your data, of course. So your data which sits on a block storage, on object storage, so we have to make sure that it is secure, it follows certain security standards, in let's say encryption in this case. So that doesn't mean that it is very difficult to configure. No, there are services which makes our life easy. For example, encryptions, there are multiple ways you can encrypt your data using AWS managed key, using your own keys. So there are multiple ways you can handle encryption, but it's on us to configure. That's important thing, right? So services do makes our life easy, but end of the day, we have to own the responsibility, and we have to ensure that encryption and network configuration, operating system is set up properly, right? So shared. This is about shared responsibility model. Now, what security solution AWS offers? So we'll look at a big picture. What process generally? What is the recommended process that we should follow for AWS security? First step, as you can see, it's to identify. We should be able to identify any potential security attacks, right? We should be able to filter out any potential security event. If we are not able to identify, forget about protecting and forget about recovering from security aspect. First step itself is to identify any security attack. So for identifying an attack, AWS offers a lot of services. For example, you have config, where we'll discuss about those services in the upcoming slide. But you have config where you can check the governance standard, and where you can see what changes have been made at what time. Then you can centrally store all your logs in CloudWatch. So that's how you can identify if there's any potential security attack. Then the next step is to protect. Now that you know that you had a security event, how would you protect against that event? So again, for this step also, AWS has multiple services, which comes from WAF, Web Application Firewall. You have Shield, you have VPC, which gives you isolated network, which you control and which you have full access. And then you have firewall manager, where you can centrally configure all your firewall rules. So there are services available for protection. Now, once you have those services and you pass the protection stage, the next step would be to detect and respond. So to detect, there are multiple ways through which you can respond. You can respond it automatically through Lambda function, or through let's say CloudWatch events, or you can respond by investigating and following a bit of manual process, which is again through CloudWatch. So it can you can get a notification that, okay, potential security event has occurred. Now you can respond, and then you can in the final stage, you can recover from that security event by rolling back the changes, or by recovering from snapshot. Let's say if your data is corrupted, let's say if the security event alerts us that okay, the volume has corrupted, a potential malware attack happened, or a ransomware attack happened, then most probably you'll recover your data from the snapshots. So the important thing is this whole process has to be automated, and AWS do provide services to automate this whole security solution, right? So we talk about identify stage. So let's start with identification. So identification will generally through log data inputs. How would you log? How would you create logs for each and every services which you use in AWS? For example, first one is CloudTrail. CloudTrail is basically for tracking user activity and API usage, cloud API usage, and it basically audits AWS activities. So you would be able to know who did what at what time in your AWS infrastructure on AWS console. So this answers who did what and what time, right? Then you have VPC flow logs, which actually which is a very important service. And if you know about VPC, it gives you isolated network space where which you own and which you manage. You have full control over ACLs, you have full control over routing table, and you can configure it as per your requirement. So with VPC flow logs, you will be able to filter out IP traffic to and from network interfaces in a VPC. So you would be able to know what traffic came inside your VPC infrastructure, what traffic went out of your VPC infrastructure at what time, along with the headers, along with the protocol related details. So so this actually gives you a lot more insight, and you will have a visibility of incoming and outgoing traffic, especially in your network infrastructure. Then you have CloudWatch logs. So when you use CloudWatch, you can actually monitor your AWS resources, and you can monitor any application which you run on AWS infrastructure. You can configure that application to send the log in a centralized location in CloudWatch, and then based on that, you can refer to those application logs or to the operating system logs, and based on that, you can set required alerts. So CloudWatch logs again uh, gi- gives you flexibility to store application logs in a centralized location. Then, of course, your DNS logs. You can also store your DNS logs in AWS in a centralized location. So, what DNS log will have? DNS logs will have log of DNS queries in a VPC when using the VPC DNS resolver. So, whenever you use a DNS resolver, it logs each and every entry inside inside the CloudWatch, right? So now you have all these logs. You have identified. You have collected all logs, all API driven logs, all VPC logs. How would you identify? How would you identify and detect threats? That's an important question. So the answer is Guard Duty. So Guard Duty allows you to centrally analyze your CloudTrail logs, your VPC flow logs, and your DNS query logs, and it intelligently detects all the threats, right? So based on the analysis, based on log analysis, Guard Duty will be able to detect if this is a potential threat or not. So first step is to enable Guard Duty, of course, right? And then the next step is to integrate with all the logs and with all the events that you have. CloudTrail events, VPC flow logs, DNS query logs. You have to integrate the logging system, logging with Guard Duty, and then the Guard Duty will have a built-in mechanism to identify and detect those threats. Now, once you identify and detect threats, then it is easy to send notification or to action or to take action, right? If you want actions to be taken automatically, you can rely on Lambda. Otherwise, you can send a notification to your administrator or to your security team that okay, following uh, security event occurred, please action. This is also possible. So Guard Duty is a very important service which intelligently detects threats. Right. So we identified, now in the previous slide we were able to identify uh, security event. We were able to intelligently detect security events. Now, how would I have visibility of everything, of all the security events in a centralized place? How can I see? How can I how can I see my security standards and security compliance in a single dashboard? So this can be done through security hubs. So AWS Security Hubs gives you a dashboard view to manage and inspect all your security events and all the security related services. So you can analyze here. So quickly you can quickly assess your high priority security alerts and compliance status across AWS account in one comprehensive view. So it doesn't matter if you have one or two AWS account, you can integrate it and you can get a single pane view of all the high priority security alerts and compliance status. This is very important. So under the hood, Security Hub will talk to Guard Duty, will have data from Amazon Macy, Inspector, and other security services which AWS offer, and you will have a single page visibility of all the security alerts and compliance status, right? Because we don't want multiple dashboards for each and every service. We want to look at security aspect of AWS from a single dashboard. So that's where Security Hub becomes very important. Now we'll talk about config and config rule. So AWS config, it's a service from AWS which is basically for your for governance. So with AWS config, you are able to continuously record and continuously assess all the AWS resources and services. So what changes happened to an AWS resource, who made that change, at what time, so you can visualize centrally using AWS config. Uh, I'll give you an example. For example, if you have an S3 bucket and a user has uploaded a file and that file has changed over the time, so you can verify what at what time and what day the file was changed and who made that change. So this gives you governance. This may answer your governance requirement. And not only that, you can set config rules. So let's say if you're following a hardened image for all your EC2 instances, or for all your virtual machines. And if an administrator is not using that hardened image to create a server or to create a virtual machine, you can get notification because you can configure rules to get those notification. Or similarly, if you have an API access which is not allowed and which is not permitted by security team, you can get a notification through config rules, right? Now, how does it look like? So config rule looks something like this. So you can see you have an S3 bucket, you have an S3 bucket name. You can see what time it was created. So it was created somewhere on 17th October. Whether it is compliant or not, whether it includes all your requirement, whether it meets all your requirement. In this case, it doesn't meet your requirement because it may be it may be exposed publicly, and it may be accessed over the internet. So it's non-compliant, and it will be highlighted accordingly. Similarly, if there is any change happened to the S3 bucket, you can capture it, what time the change have occurred, who made change, all those details can be captured with config. And it's very important to uh, it's a very important service when you have to analyze your configuration and compliance standard in a central location. You can very well use config. Now we'll talk about CloudWatch events. So CloudWatch events captures events from all the AWS services, right? Right. Let's say if you have S3 bucket, if you have EC2 instance, any event which happens on any AWS service will be captured through CloudWatch. And let's say if an event occur, what we want to do, right? We just don't want to see all the events, right? We want to take certain actions. So for one example could be, let's say if any virtual machine is deleted, I want to send an alert to the administrator that okay, following virtual machine is deleted. So this is through CloudWatch event. An event will be captured for instance termination, and rules can be to send a notification maybe through SNS topic, or to automate it by using Lambda function. Let's say if instance is deleted, I want to recreate that instance using the Lambda function. I can automate all those things. So CloudWatch event is another very important service in terms of security. So what it does, it captures all AWS APIs, custom event and service event. And based on that, we can action. We can define our rules and we can define our targets, what actions we can take, right? Whether it's notification or whether it is taking an automated action using Lambda function. So this is about CloudWatch events. Now we'll talk about automatic remediation. We discussed that in upcoming slide, but we will go in at greater depth. So with automatic remediation, you will be able to remediate a compromised instance. That's one example. You will be able to remediate compromised AWS credential. So let's say if your credential are stolen and you have lost your credential, right? And you want to block all sort of access related to that AWS credential. Well, you can automate that, and we'll see how you can. So the first step is to detect. Detection will generally happen through guard duty. So you'll be able to detect any kind of compromise in any kind of security event. For example, if there's a compromise instance, if there's any AWS credential, you will get it can be detected easily through guard duty, and we know guard duty aggregates all the logs. So again, identify stage becomes important, where we identify all those logs and share those logs with guard duty. So detection basically happens at guard duty. Now, guard duty can send a CloudWatch event notification, and this is where it gets reported. And you can then take action using Lambda function. This can be like blocking the AWS credential. Inside your Lambda function, you can write codes which blocks the AWS credential, or which terminates the compromised instances automatically, right? So Lambda, as you know, it has certain triggers. So you can create a trigger for Lambda, and CloudWatch event can be one of the triggers for Lambda, and it can automatically remediate, or it can take actions based on certain events. So this diagram, which we can see in this slide, it shows you how you can automate the remediation process. So three-step process: detect, report, and act. Detect can be through guard duty. Reporting basically comes from CloudWatch events. It can be S3 event also if you're using S3, and action is from Lambda function if you are automating it, right? If you're taking an automated action, it has to be through Lambda function. Otherwise, if it's just for alerting, it can be SNS, or it can be another AWS services, right? So threat remediation automation, as we discussed previously, so it's through Amazon CloudWatch, where in CloudWatch you will have dashboard and you can visualize threat. You can remediate your workflows in case of certain events. You can always create remediation workflows. Then Lambda is very important service when we talk about automation. So you can run code for virtually any kind of application or backend service. So if you're good at Node.js, if you're good in PowerShell, you can create PowerShell script to take certain action when certain CloudWatch event happen. We discussed in the previous slide, when a compromised instances is detected, you can write a Lambda function to terminate that instance. This is one very simple example, but it can be anything which matches or which satisfies your security requirement. You can code it using Lambda. Then we have Systems Manager. With Systems Manager, it's a very powerful tool through which you can automate your patching process. You can remotely execute commands on your EC2 instances, and you can proactively mitigate threat at instance level. So you will have a single point view where you can see all your running instances, and you can centrally define patching policies for all the instances. You can create patch groups, and then you can mitigate threats at the instance level itself, which means at the virtual machine level itself, right? Now we have a new concept in security, and it's called DevSecOps. I know many of you know about DevOps, but this is a new thing, which and a new standard which we follow in AWS. It's called DevSecOps. We know what is dev and we know what is ops, right? So dev, if you don't know, we will discuss in this slide. So dev is someone who develops software, follow same processes, standards as application development. He will use certain tools. Developer will ensure certain quality checks and change management. So primary responsibility of developer to ensure that he delivers a quality software, and it it includes certain quality checks. There are developer also ensures that change management has been taken care seamlessly, right? So primarily related to development side. And we have operation folks. So operation folks, as you know, they manage operation. They have certain operations duties, right? So any changes that happen on the development side, anything related to orchestration, anything related to automation of the development infrastructure will be handled by the operation folks, right? So it's an extension of your team, and they pretty much interact with the dev team to make sure the application is delivered in an expected manner and in a timely manner. Now we have a new set of people which is related to security. The primary role of the security folks is to deliver that the software developed is explicitly focused on security. Now we cannot ignore security aspect of the application, and security has to be included at all levels. It cannot be at the very end when we develop the whole application and then we thought about, oh, we now have to secure that application. No, it has to be ensured at each and every level. So we need to ensure that security is addressed while developing the application, while doing the quality testing, security policies are followed. We have to ensure that proper identity access control is granted for the development of the application, and many more things. So the important thing is security has to be included at each and every level of the development, right? So that's where we have folks who can do all those three activity, and these are called DevSecOps guys. Now with DevOps, we know that there are three stages in the delivery pipeline, which is build, test, and release. When we talk about DevSecOps, as we discussed in the previous slide, we need to ensure security at all level. So when we are at the build stage, there is a security layer, and we have to plan for the security related events in advance, right? While building the code itself, there's a test phase. The security has to be included in the test phase also, right? And there's a release phase. So security layer, as you can see, it's common in all those three phases, and it has to be taken care at every level. So when we follow this standard, what happens? First thing, our application will be very secure. We ensure that we followed all the security policies at each level. So there is a very, negligible chance that we do not address any security policies. Very negligible. So this ensures continuous security policies are followed across each and every phases of the pipeline. Now with DevOps, uh, what happens is efficiency that speed up the life cycle. So with DevOps, you can speed up the life cycle process, right? And whereas in DevSecOps, you ensure that security practices are followed across the pipeline, and we ensure that each and every phase has gone through the security assessment, and we have incorporated security policies at each and every phase, right? So that's how AWS basically recommend us to follow the security standards, but especially when you are using continuous integration and continuous deployment. So with CI/CD, it's very important to take security into consideration, right? Now we'll talk about security and compliance, and we'll talk about how it is addressed currently and in on-prem setup. So when we talk about on-prem setup, when we talk about on-prem setup and we discuss security, we start our discussion with tools. What tools do we have to use, right, to secure our infrastructure? What the tool can deliver, right? What kind of correlations can be created with the tool? Then we talk about discussing the process and expected outcome using that tool. I'm talking about the on-prem setup when you have resources in on-prem and when you're following a traditional security framework. What are the stages? So the next, when you select a tool, then the next step would be to discuss the process and to discuss the expected outcome, what the tool can deliver and what process we need to follow. Then the third step in on-prem and in the on-prem security process would be to define security compliance and expectation. That's at the last. But in AWS, we follow a complete different paradigm. So we work backwards. So we do not decide on tool first. We first sit with the customer. What AWS tells that we first need to sit with the customer, understand their security compliance requirement, and what is their expectation. That's the first step. So if you see in on-prem, that's the last step. But when we talk about AWS, that's the very first step. And how it benefits. So when we discuss about security compliance requirement for the customer, we can then create process and we can then decide on expected outcome. The last step would be to discuss tools and services, right? So, so if you see in AWS, it's completely different. Tools and services comes in the end, whereas security compliance expectation processes comes first, right? This helps us in mitigating many challenges, because when you decide on tool first, when you select the tool first, you are locked. So you have to work on the services which tools offer, right? So you are locked in that tool and you cannot deliver something which the tool is not capable of delivering, right? So that's why it's very important to define security compliance and expectation first, then your process, and then tools and services. That's the right approach. Now with AWS, the last point would be on the AWS security framework side. So when we have workload on AWS, it's very important to define security framework. Uh, what actions has to be taken care? Who would be responsible for managing certain events? Let's say if an alert comes, who from the security team would address? What kind of triggers has to be created, right? So these are the groundwork which we should do in advance, and there should be a framework which defines all those steps. So this is just an example. It can be different for different use cases, but this is just to give an idea what security framework you can define, or you can use this as a reference maybe for other customer, and you can create a new security framework based upon the guidelines. So you have modes where you can initiate and where you can execute security operations, right? And then we have sections and actions. Sections, first one is to react phase, basically would be through config rules, your CloudWatch event as we discussed, and your log passing would be your VPC flow logs and other logs which you pass to CloudWatch. Trigger, what triggers an action? How would you automate? How would you create rules? It's basically through Lambda. And how would you learn if there is anything happening in our infrastructure, which is basically through logs. We will analyze logs and we will learn if there's anything suspicious happening in our infrastructure. So learning is basically through centralized logging. Now, priority actions, what to do when a certain event occur. So this could be anything like restarting a service, like deleting a user account, blocking public access. It can be anything. So the actions has to be defined for each and every security events. What actions do we want to take? And it really helps when we have to create rules. Now, forensics section, it tells you it's mostly related to discovery, who, where, when allowed to execute. So basically, your cloud trail, who did what at what time, and who is allowed to do what set of activities on AWS, right? So forensics actions also has to be defined clearly in the security framework. You then have section for countermeasure. So what are the countermeasure? How would you address a security attack? It could be anything related to disabling access keys, isolating the instance, and so on. Now, if you notice, we have two different sections called priority action and countermeasures. It sounds similar, but it's different. Priority action is how you will address the security attack at that particular time. How would you address that event? Security event. Countermeasure is how will you ensure that in future you do not get such security events. That's countermeasure. That's like creating a guardrail so that this security event do not occur in future. This can be related to disabling access keys, isolating instances, or anything, right? So those, the important thing is those countermeasures has to be defined clearly in our security framework. Then we talk about alerts. How would you like to get alert for a security event, whether it is through text, whether it is through email, or whether you want to integrate with your ticketing system so your security folks get alert when certain event occurred in your system. Another section for execution is logging. So what do you want to log? So for example, logging can have a databases, it can be through a ticketing system, and or do you want to encrypt the data? This all things has to be logged. So logging a security event is also very, very important. And the important thing is when you move to AWS, when you have workload running on AWS, you should have a security framework so that you know what to do when a particular security event occurs. And this is just to give you a guideline. You can have your own security framework, but basically this is just to tell you that you can have a security framework, something similar. You are not locked to all those sections. You may have a greater requirement, you may have a different security requirement, but this is a general security framework which you can use as a reference. That's the whole point. Right. So what we discussed about enterprise security logging. We discussed about identifying a security event. We discussed about automating security best practices. We discussed about configuration, AWS config, how you can meet your governance requirement in AWS. So we discussed a lot of things, and finally we discussed about security framework. Right. So let's look at a bigger picture now. So this is how ideally you should address a security response. You have number of sources, right? You can have CloudTrail, which sends APIs logs to CloudWatch. You can have VPC flow logs, which again send network-related logs to CloudWatch events. You have Guard Duty, which again relies on VPC flow logs, CloudTrail, CloudWatch events, and it can centralize all your logging system and send a notification to CloudWatch event. You can have Amazon Macy, you can have AWS config service. The bottom line is they all send notification, they all send event notification to CloudWatch, and CloudWatch has a CloudWatch event section, which can help us in triggering a Lambda function. And as we know, Lambda function can do certain activities to mitigate security attacks. So under the hood, the trigger for Lambda would be CloudWatch event. So CloudWatch events are pulled from all the AWS services like CloudTrail, Guard Duty, Macy, Config, and when a trigger to Lambda happens via CloudWatch event, it can take automated actions, right? So it can send a notification to team through Slacks or through SNS topic through on your mobile device, or it can run code to automatically remediate the security uh, event, or to automatically mitigate the security event. So it's through AWS APIs, right? So this is ideally, this is how your security response should be. So detect, investigate, and respond. So these are three important layers. Detect, as we know, will come from Guard Duty, CloudTrail, Macy, Config. Investigation basically happens at CloudWatch event, and response could be Lambda. And Lambda can run code to mitigate a security event which occurred. So ideally, this is how you should respond to a security event in AWS, right? So guys, that's it from my side. If you have questions, feel free, put your questions in the chat box, and I'll be able to answer those questions. All right.
Sure, Rahil. If anything comes up, I will redirect it to you. Yeah.
Thanks, Junaid. So I'll
Thank
I'll
you.
stop screen sharing.
Yes.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you,
Take
Rahil.
care. You're
You
welcome.
too.